Hey, what's going on, my friend? It's Jeff Newport from ChasingStrength.com. And in today's video, we are going to complete our video series. Today is part 3 in rethinking the perfect kettlebell workout plan for you. Okay. So if you recall, in our last video, part 2, we covered the importance of managing fatigue and its role in you getting the results you're after. We'll flash that up here on the screen somewhere here. Today, we are going to cover the O. So let's dive in, shall we? Now, the O is formed from one volume, which is the total amount of work performed. So sets times reps times the weight or load that you're using. Two, intensity, which, to quote Dr. Fred Hatfield, aka Dr. Squat, the first man to ever squat over 1,000 pounds. I think this is his quote. I'm going to give it to him anyway because it's a great quote. He says, intensity is not a grimace and a backwards baseball cap. Okay. But rather, intensity is a percentage or the percentage you're using of your maximum load, your 1 rep max, or any other repetition maximum that you're basing your percentages off, right? So 2 RM, 3 RM, 5 RM, 6 RM, 10 RM, any RM. I think you get the picture. And number 3, it's based off your effort, which is what most people confuse with intensity, as in HIIT, right? High intensity training. That is the quick overview, right? So volume, intensity, and effort. And so let's dive in a little deeper here. So volume, right, as we saw in our last video, and we just covered off on in the intro to this video, is the number of sets times reps times load, or the weight that you're using. It's often broken down per exercise, per training session, per week, per month, and sometimes even further. So what's really important for us to know is that the more work you do, the more fatigue you accumulate or create. So the more rest you typically are going to need, right? And that's why 5 or 6 day a week plans are not normally a good idea for most of us over 40. We just don't have the recovery ability that we did when we were in our teens and 20s. Okay. Our energy goes other places, more important places when we're our age, and that's to our jobs and our families. And it's also why if you're going to train with this level of frequency, I recommend short training sessions, like really short, 15 to 20 minutes max, so you can recover. All right. That way you will be able to stack up a fair amount of volume over the course of your week, more than you probably could in one training session. And more importantly, you'll do it without killing yourself, right? So you can come back and do it again and again and again. So some other things we need to know about volume is actually necessary to build strength. And it's actually necessary to build, what we call capacity, right? Physical capacity, the ability to do work and lots of it. And at the end of the day, with volume, you just have to figure out a way to get the reps in. But the key to doing so is to be able to do it in a manner that doesn't tear you down physically, psychologically, and emotionally, so you can still function as a spouse and a parent and a productive member of society, right? Without having like a juvenile adolescent breakdown. Okay. So all right, so that's volume. Let's talk about effort. Again, effort, as we saw, is what most bodybuilders and bodybuilding magazines mean when they talk about intensity. Bruh, that workout was intense. Translated, brother, that training session was of high effort. All right, you get the picture, right? I'm sure you've used those words, right? You used that phrase in that way. Okay, I know I certainly have back in the day. Okay, but the problem with effort is the harder you train, the more recovery you will need. Okay. And that's why I found it makes sense for those of us over 40 and 50, yes, even 60 and 70, to use the RPE scale, which is called the rate of perceived exertion. And it's a scale that we use from 1 to 10, where 1 is sitting on the couch, flipping through TV channels, right? That's about how much effort you're using. And 10 is an all out maximum effort where you can't do any more than you're currently doing. Okay. So most of the time, we need to keep our RPEs between a 7 and an 8, sometimes as high as an 8.5. And usually, the higher your intensity, the higher your effort, kind of by default. So the two are coupled. Okay. And therefore, the larger the demand for recovery from your body. Okay. Let me say that right. When you push your intensity up, your effort goes up along with it. Again, usually they're coupled, and that creates a larger demand from your body for more recovery. Okay. That's why I use RPEs, and that's why they're my favorite way to use what I call, or what is called, autoregulation. And that's the daily management of your energy output based upon daily energy levels in your physiological/psychological state. Okay. So on some days, what that means is you can push really hard because you feel great and everything feels easy. And on other days, well, you feel like garbage and everything is a grind. As I say, you feel like the cigarette butt in the shoe of life. Okay, you're getting ground into the pavement there. The reality is, using auto-regulation, it really doesn't matter how you feel, and it will actually work in your favor than trying to just push hard all the time. And that's because auto-regulation creates a natural, what's called waviness, right? An up and down of the load, which back in the 1970s, Soviet researchers, Dr. Arkady Vorobiev and his assistant, A. Ermakov, discovered that waviness of loads produce a greater strength gains than traditional progressive overload programming. Okay. And I think that's pretty interesting to know because Professor Vorobiev was actually a world champion weightlifter. You might want to pay attention to him. He might know a thing or two about what he's talking about, right? So, speaking of loading, let's take a look at intensity. Again, a little closer look at intensity. So, speaking of Dr. Vorobiev and the Soviets, well, they found overall, the Soviets, found that strength is best gained and kept primarily by using an intensity range of 70 to 85% of your one repetition maximum. My coach, my weightlifting coach, Alfonso Duran, who is on the Cuban weightlifting team, was also trained by the great Soviet weightlifting world champion and weightlifting team coach, Alexei Medvedev. And Alfonso found that this range, 70 to 85%, can actually be extended and is extended for everyday Joes and Janes to approximately 60 to 85% and as high as 90% of your 1RM, depending on who you are. So who's right? The answer is yes, both are right. And what I found in the last 15 years or so, maybe a little longer actually, if I'm honest, is that those ranges work even better if they're based upon a 4-rep max, a 4RM, or a 5-rep max, 5RM instead of a 1RM. Incidentally, when I was a strength coach, but behind the ears a lifetime ago, back in the late 1990s, back at Rutgers University, I based all my athletes' training cycles off the 4-rep max, which was roughly plus or minus, a couple percentage points, 90% of their 1RM. And that's primarily because arousal levels, the psyching up that we need to do in order to hit a 1RM, even if it's a 1 training max, which is what some people are calling them now, a 1 TM instead of 1RM, a 1 training max, 1 rep training max, takes too much out of us everyday folks, right? It drains us and depletes us of our energy. So as a result, the weights, sets, reps for the cycle that follows that we've built off that training max or that 1 rep max become too heavy for many of us to complete and manage, right? So what that means is as those weights get heavier 4 to 6 weeks into the cycle, we just can't hit those reps and sets, right? And then we feel like failures and because we got to change the workout, we can't complete it as written. And again, that's because, right, we didn't take into consideration where we are in our lives, okay, and all the stress that we have placed upon us. So all that to say, I prefer to use the 4RM or 5RM or even sometimes the 10RM because even though they may require some psyching up, not really. I can tell you as somebody who's competed in weightlifting, right, the amount of mental RAM for a 4RM or a 5RM is nothing compared to a 1RM, okay? So pretty much anybody can hit a 4RM, okay, compared to a 1RM. All right. So that it's not overly taxing on your nervous system. Okay. And you can usually complete any cycle built off a 4RM or 5RM with no problem whatsoever. Okay. So as a result, I think I've probably beaten that horse, but I think we're beating that dead horse, or maybe it's not a dead horse. Maybe it's just a horse, was a horse and now it's dead. I don't know. Please don't call PETA. That's probably just a terrible analogy, right? I think you need to come up with some other analogy, but I think you get my point, right? RMs, repetition maxes, they should be the foundation for most of your training programs, okay, to help you manage the intensity, right, which is not to be confused with effort. Okay, so what do we call the management and balancing of volume, intensity, and effort? Well, that's called overload, and we'll flash that up here on the screen, right? So getting back to our perfect program, our perfect kettlebell plan, or at least our almost perfect kettlebell plan / program, because we know that in the natural world, perfect doesn't truly exist, right? It is the program that produces optimum results, okay? That sweet spot right in the middle, the perfect blend of practice, fatigue, and overload. And I think it's important to note that this perfect blend is based on 3 different parameters, right? For lack of a better term. This perfect blend changes depending on your goals. Okay. It also changes based on your season of life. Where do you find yourself? Okay. It's going to be different as a 22-year-old than it is as a 32-year-old with a newborn. Okay. And it's going to be different as a 42-year-old with some teenagers, right? Or maybe like a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old. And it's going to be different from a 52-year-old, okay, for a 52-year-old whose kids are in their late teens and they're about to finish high school and go off to college, or, one's still in high school and one's off to college, right? So this is going to change. The perfect blend is going to change based on your season of life. And it's also important to note that this perfect blend varies from person to person based upon his or her injury history and training background, which begs the question for 2024, right? What's the best program, the best training program for you? Well, again, it's going to depend on your goals, your limitations, right? Physical, lifestyle, medical, otherwise. And most importantly, it also depends on where you find yourself on the 5-level kettlebell training pyramid. Remember that, right? Maybe you didn't. Maybe you haven't seen that video. We got the pyramid flashed up here. And what I'll do is I'll put the video link in the description below, or maybe we can even embed it in this video somewhere around here, right? And if you want some ideas for programs that you can do based on where you find yourself on this 5-level pyramid of kettlebell training, I'll leave various links for programs and what they do in the description below. Okay. Hopefully you found this video and this entire video series helpful. If you did, click the like button. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, or I should say, remember to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And please feel free to share this with a friend or family member, or multiple friends and family members who need to hear this information. Okay. Until next time, my friend, stay strong.